Hi everyone. Sorry for the long delay in videos, but I am back from my break. I am at my house in Eugene, Oregon for a few weeks here. We just got back from a wonderful festival in Kentucky called Playthink. If you are signed up for my Soothe Wellness, my other business's newsletter, you will see that we had an amazing turnout at our workshop. We had like 50 people come to our workshop. It was really incredible. We got tons of good feedback afterwards. So we feel so privileged to have had that opportunity. And if you want to experience some of our work in terms of resetting and regulating the nervous system, please go over to our website over there, experiencesoothes.com, and sign up for our mailing list so that you get our newsletters and you know when we're going to be in different places. We're also going to be offering some online things in the fall. So stay tuned for that. We haven't announced it yet, but we will be soon. Um, but I wanted to come back on to do a video that I got a request on a while ago, actually, and I had forgotten about it. It got lost in my list of topics. So I wanted to make sure I address it before I move on to asking for other requests for videos. And that is, how do you heal on a budget? So I post a lot about, the grocery hauls that I get, my farmers markets hauls that I get, in terms of what kind of foods are going to be best to eat to reset your gut and nourish your brain and heal your nervous system and all that good stuff that I focus on in my practice. And the cost of this stuff can really add up, and so I definitely got a request to talk about, like, how do you do this on a budget? How do you do a gut reset on a budget? And I think that there is a stereotype out there that natural healing is kind of a well-off person's thing, right? Like the whole alternative healing world, like, oh, that's for financially privileged people, right? That's not something that an average person could have access to. And I do want to acknowledge that there is some truth in that, especially if we're talking about people on the far low end of the socioeconomic spectrum. I can't speak to other countries very well. Obviously, I don't have that experience, but at least in the U.S., this is a real issue, right? There are food deserts. There are places, especially in very remote rural areas or like really deep in inner cities, where there are no grocery stores. People do not have any access to fresh food. Everything is convenience food and processed food. And there are, certain states, where they're financial assistance, for food only covers certain foods, which are kind of in line with like an anti-fat, anti-meat agenda a lot of the times, which is very problematic. And then, yes, there is a cost, right? Unfortunately, we have a lot of subsidies in this country where commodity foods like corn and wheat are subsidized to make them artificially cheaper, unfortunately. And so foods that don't include those commodity ingredients can get artificially inflated as more expensive. And so I do want to acknowledge that this is an issue, again, especially for people living in certain areas who are, more on the low end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And I also want to acknowledge that there are ways to eat healthy food, eat whole foods, eat nourishing foods, and heal yourself naturally on a budget. It is accessible to a lot of people, probably a lot more than realize it. You just have to maybe think a little outside the box. And so I'm going to give some tips for that, because a lot of people with chronic illness are on a bit of a budget, right? A lot of us can't work very well, or, can't work very high paying jobs, and are stuck in some constrained financial situations. So I'm going to talk through that. So the first thing I want to talk about is food quality, because food quality determines a lot of price point. Right, so if you're going to be looking for labels like organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, wild-caught, all of these things, and I promote my clients looking for those labels because those are going to be the highest quality foods that have the lowest levels of toxins in terms of pesticides and other issues. And they're going to have the most nutrients, right? Animals raised on pasture, seafood that's wild caught. Food that you can get from smaller farms which have not had the soil depleted through generations of monocropping, people who are doing regenerative agriculture on a smaller scale, so food you would buy at farmers markets, they're going to have higher nutrient content, right? And so if you have the financial access to those kinds of things, do it. absolutely 100%, it is worth it. But just because you may not be able to afford buying all your groceries at the farmer's market, or buying all your meat grass-fed, or looking for the pasture-raised poultry or pork, all that kind of stuff. If you cannot afford organic food, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be still trying to heal with food. So we want to acknowledge the spectrum of relative effectiveness, right? So again, absolutely, if you are buying the organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, farmers market produce, all that kind of stuff, that is going to be best. Lowest toxins, highest nutrients, right? But if you are going to buy conventional meat, non-organic produce, just the bare bones, like average, cheapest grocery store food, that is still going to support and facilitate your healing more than if you were buying convenience and processed foods for cheap. All right. So we want to acknowledge that there's a spectrum. This is not an all or nothing issue. And it's really important that we do not get stuck in perfectionism, especially if we are on a constrained budget. Eating conventional beef from Walmart is still going to be better than buying, the cheap pre-made commodity foods that you're going to be finding like in the middle of the aisles or in the frozen section or things like that. So do what you can. There are absolutely people who heal eating non-organic, conventional, just your basic, at whatever cheap grocery store is in town, types of whole foods. It's not great. If you can afford more than that, do it. But it can still be effective, and it's still going to support your healing more than the alternative. So again, don't get stuck on perfection. Do what you can afford. Whole foods are the key, and quality is a relative issue. Another thing you can do is you can just kind of prioritize with your budget, right? So, for example, you could just buy the Dirty Dozen produce organic and then buy the rest conventional, right? Because we know from research that certain produce, certain fruits and vegetables tend to absorb pesticides more than others, right? So it's a relative issue. Again, let's do harm reduction, right? Let's just cut down on harm. The types of produce that tend to absorb the most pesticides, get those organic, don't worry about the rest. And you can find those lists from the EWG, which is a wonderful organization. So look at that. Try to buy all your produce in season. Don't buy things that had to be shipped from Mexico or other places in South America. Only buy stuff that can be grown locally in season. That's going to cut down on your costs as well. Toxins tend to accumulate also more in the fat of animals, right? So if we're talking about animal foods, if you can only buy non-organic, grain-fed meat, then you want to look for stuff that is lower fat. So another way to kind of cut down on harm is to buy lean cuts of meat, non-organic, right? Because there's not going to be as many toxins in the protein in the meat. It's mostly in the fat. And then what you could do is you could then buy your fats organic, right? So maybe if there's a butcher in your area, that has access to organic beef trimmings. Or if, a lot of places now, even like Walmarts and stuff, you can buy organic ghee, right? The clarified butter, or maybe you just buy organic butter, right? Or something like that. And then you add that organic fat, which to the lean, cheap, conventional meat that you have, right? And that together is going to be lower in toxin, but it's going to be a little better for your budget than buying the nicer, fattier cuts of meat, all organic and grass-fed. So there are a lot of these little tips and tricks if you kind of really get creative and think outside the box to also like reduce your costs but up your healing potential. Frozen vegetables are also usually more affordable, and there's nothing wrong with them. There's kind of a weird idea that there must be something wrong with them, but they're not. They're totally fine, and often they're cheaper than buying produce fresh. Now, this does require a little bit of a investment up front, and so not everyone is going to do this. But in the long term, if you can set aside a few $100, or even up to $1,000, if you can save that and set that aside, buying meat in bulk actually saves you a ton of money in the long term because you get all the different cuts for a lower average price. Right? So instead of, spending all this money on these nice cuts of meat that have a lot of fat, maybe grass fed. I mean, you buy a grass fed ribeye, that is expensive, right? But if you're getting half a cow that include the ribeyes, you're getting it for a much lower baseline price because, like, half of it's going to be ground beef, right? And it's more beneficial to the farmer to sell their animals in bulk. It's less hassle for them. So if you can go out of your way to, get a cheap used chest freezer that you can keep somewhere, and you can save up the money to make a big meat purchase all at once, and you can take the time to drive out to a farmer, and do this all at once. If that is at all accessible to you, it is a lot more affordable in the long term because you could live off that for 6 months. Even though you put a big investment in, then you don't have to buy meat again for 6 months. So that is another really great way to do it affordably. That takes a little more strategizing, so it's not accessible for everyone, but something to look at. You can render your own fat, right? A lot of times, like I said, butchers will just give away fat trimmings, or they'll sell it to you for really cheap, right? Like $1 a pound kind of situation we're talking about. So always, if you do have any butchers in your area, or even if you just have a grocery store in your area that, cuts its own meat, check in with them. There's nothing wrong with asking. The worst thing that's going to happen is someone looks at you weird, and you'll be okay. So always check in and see if you can just get fat trimmings, and then you can render it down really easily and make your own tallow and things that you can always cook in, and you always have a healthy fat source then, for really, really cheap. The other thing is that a lot of really nutritious cuts of meat are actually not very popular in the modern world, right? Everyone wants their ribeye, everyone wants their grilling steaks. But actually, a lot of the nutrients are in these kind of like odd bits, right? That are actually usually much cheaper. So, big like roasts that you would make into like pot roasts and soups, bones like knuckle bones and soup bones and marrow bones, these are usually pretty affordable. Organ meats as well, a lot of times like the heart and the kidney and the liver, they're actually pretty cheap because, again, not a lot of people are eating them. Now, from what I've heard and talking to farmers recently as I've traveled, this is changing a little bit as people are doing more nose to tail. So this may not always be true for the organs anymore, but it's worth looking into. And again, making a good bone broth or a meat stock, or pot roast, all these kinds of not as desirable nowadays cuts of meat that you would make into soups and things like that. You can stretch that a long way, and you can get a lot of good protein out of that for more affordable. A lot of animal foods are actually very affordable, especially if you're buying them conventional. And a lot of people get caught up on, oh, but I need to eat all this produce in order to heal and in order to be healthy. And you really don't. There are a lot of cultures around the world that really just eat plants when they're in season, which for a lot of places is like a few months a year, and they eat mostly carnivore the rest of the year. So don't get caught up on having to buy a huge variety of vegetables. Buy whatever is cheap and in season and local, right? And that's fine. You can eat the same 3 or 4 vegetables over and over and over again for months if that's just what's in season and that's what's cheap. And that's totally fine. And you may even go periods of time where you don't eat any produce because you're in a place where it's just not affordable, right? Especially in the middle of winter, things like that. And you can live off of ground beef and eggs, and canned fish like sardines. These are cheap stuff, and they're extremely nutritious and extremely affordable. Again, even if you have to buy low quality conventional, forms of these foods, it is absolutely doable, and it's still going to be better than eating the commodity foods. Let's see what else. Oh, and again, this not everyone's going to have access to this, but if there is any kind of community garden, in your area. And a lot of places, there are a lot of people doing really cool work, even in kind of inner city areas. There are a lot of really neat organizations popping up trying to bring more access to healthy whole foods, to people who maybe usually don't have access to this stuff. And so it's worth looking into in your area, right? If there's some kind of a community garden or community supported agriculture program, a lot of times these kinds of programs can actually bring in really healthy, wonderful farm fresh foods for fairly inexpensive, or you can get your own plot at a community garden and start growing some of your own produce. And these are great options too if you have the energy and the ability, and people are doing this kind of stuff in your area. So, connect with people, network with people, see what people are up to. People always have their little pet projects and are doing neat things. And so it's really worth trying to network and find things like that wherever you are. Or start it if you are inspired to. So I've mostly been talking about food, but that's not all there is to natural healing. And I think a lot of people get caught up on like, oh, I need to do, acupuncture and I need to get all these supplements and I need to do all these, all this really fancy testing and I need to, do all these alternative therapies that end up being very expensive. And I've done that, I have spent a lot of money on tests. I spent a lot of money on alternative therapies and supplements. And to be honest, I don't feel like any of that was really the key to my healing. I don't want to say it was a waste. I think like that kind of stuff can be helpful, but it's not necessary. I mean, the food is really the linchpin. I mean, this is really the key to healing is the food. And so focus on that and then think about ways you can support your healing that are completely free, right? Grounding, getting your the electrical charge in your body balanced, right? By being barefoot on soil, right? Or rock, whatever it is. Go outside barefoot if there's a park nearby. Even if you just have like a tiny little patch of dirt, available to you nearby. That's fine. It works, right? Put your bare feet on the dirt. That's free. Sunlight. Sunlight is a major component to healings, and it doesn't have to be like blue sky sunlight. It can be through clouds, and that's free. Again, right? So just going outside, exposing your skin to sunlight, exposing your eyes to sunlight every day. I mean, this is a key to healing, and it's totally free. Things like meditation and other methods of nervous system regulation. There are so many free resources online. Now, the quality of all the advice out there isn't always impeccable, but there are a lot of resources out there, like self-help resources for free. A lot of people giving, free information. Start exploring on YouTube, start listening to podcasts. I mean, there are so many tools out there to help you regulate your nervous system and help you get to a more calm, grounded state that you can just do in your own home, for free. So all of that stuff is definitely something to consider as well. And in terms of supplements, I do recommend supplements to a lot of my clients. I think they can be very helpful, but they are also extremely overused and over relied on, right? So you can heal with no supplements, right? Absolutely. Now, sometimes, one or two targeted supplements can be very helpful, but you don't have to spend an arm and a leg on it, and honestly, sometimes just even like a whole food supplement, like something like cod liver oil, like save your supplement budget for something like that and just do that, or Epsom salts, where you're going to get a lot of natural magnesium and things like that. I would really, if you're going to buy any supplements and you're on a tight budget, save it for stuff like that, and don't worry about the rest. Supplement companies make a lot of really big claims, and frankly, I don't usually see that be the key to someone's healing. It's a nice addition that can help support someone's healing process, and sometimes can be very helpful, but don't think that if you can't afford supplements, you can't heal. That's absolutely not true. Focus on the food, focus on the self-help, focus on sunlight and grounding, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah. Lastly, I will say cleaning up your hygiene and cleaning products. We tend to think we have to buy a lot of products to be, I don't know, like civilized or clean or smell nice or something. We can really get away with a bare minimum, so that's going to be a lot cheaper. And the products you do need, if you DIY this stuff, it is so affordable, right? You can get a container of coconut oil and pretty much use that for everything, right? Some baking soda and some coconut oil. It's this kind of um, a really great universal hygiene product. So, and cleaning as well, right? Like just get some vinegar, and have some baking soda, have some basic soap, and you are good to go. So, honestly, sometimes engaging in a non toxic lifestyle ends up being more affordable. Okay, that's the last thing I'll say. If anyone else has tips of how they've made their healing practice more affordable, please leave a comment. I would love to hear more tips and tricks, because this is a real issue for a lot of people, or they may have a lot of preconceived ideas about what the cost is going to be that may not actually be true. So leave your tips and comments, and I'd love to see them. And if you have other, I'm going to be getting back on more of a regular schedule of releasing videos. So if you have other questions or topics you want me to address, please let me know.